Some debts can only be paid, but some loves can only be proven in sacrifice.
In the dust and blood of a dying September day, a gunslinger whispered 3 secrets to the woman he'd loved for 20 years, words so powerful they would build an empire of mercy from the ashes of violence, transform a ghost into a legend, and prove that some debts can only be paid in sacrifice. Before we dive into what happened next, smash that like button and leave a comment below telling me what you think actually happened in that rain-soaked moment. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the surprises hiding in plain sight. The Arizona sun hung low and angry over Redemption Creek on September 17, 1883, painting the main street in shades of amber and crimson that looked too much like blood. Eva Morrison stood on the balcony of her boarding house, her black dress stark against the weathered wood, her hands gripping the railing with a force that made her knuckles bone-white beneath her brown skin. She'd known this day was coming from the moment Dalton Reeves had ridden into town 3 days prior, his reputation arriving before him like the stench of death on a hot wind. The street below was silent in a way that made the air feel thick, heavy, hard to breathe. Every soul in Redemption Creek had gathered, merchants abandoning their stores, mothers clutching children who were too young to understand what they were about to witness, old men who'd seen enough shootouts to know how this one would end. They lined the boardwalks on both sides of the wide dirt street, a gallery of witnesses to the death of a legend. At the north end of the street stood Dalton Reeves, 26 years old and already responsible for 17 confirmed kills. Maybe more. The bodies in unmarked graves didn't come with receipts. He wore black leather and silver spurs that caught the dying light, his matched Colts hanging low on his hips with the easy weight of tools well used. His face was handsome in the way that poison can be beautiful, all sharp angles and cold eyes that held no more warmth than a snake's. He was grinning, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect, anticipating a victory he'd already claimed in his mind. At the south end stood Black Jack Thornton, and Eva's heart broke all over again just looking at him. He was 42 years old, though he looked older, the kind of aging that comes from carrying too much weight on your soul rather than living too many years. His black duster hung from shoulders that were still broad but no longer carried the arrogance of youth. The twin Remingtons on his hips looked wrong somehow, foreign, like he'd picked up someone else's guns by mistake. His face, weathered by sun and sorrow, held an expression Eva had never seen before, acceptance. Not of victory, but of death. He'd worn that duster the day he'd asked her to marry him, 20 years ago when they were both young and stupid and believed love could conquer anything. She remembered running her fingers along the worn leather, remembered the smell of gun oil and sage that clung to him, remembered saying yes with her whole heart. She also remembered the day she'd taken that yes back, 3 months later, after Jack had killed 2 men in a saloon fight over a card game that didn't matter. After she'd seen the look in his eyes when the smoke cleared, not regret, not horror, but satisfaction. The look of a man who'd found his calling, and that calling was death. "I can't marry a killer," she'd told him, her voice breaking on every word. "I can't spend my life wondering if you'll come home or if I'll be burying you before I'm 25. Then I'll stop," he'd said, desperate in a way that scared her more than his violence. "I'll hang up the guns, Eva. For you, I'll." "You can't," she'd interrupted, and she'd known it was true even as her heart shattered. "It's in you now. The violence. It'll always be in you. And I can't live with that shadow." She'd married Thomas Morrison 6 months later, a quiet bank clerk with soft hands and softer eyes who'd never held a gun in his life and never would. A safe man. A good man. A man who could give her the peaceful life she'd convinced herself she wanted. And Jack had spiraled deeper into the legend, his name becoming synonymous with death, his reputation growing with every man who'd been foolish enough to draw on him. He'd married too, eventually a saloon girl named Catherine who'd died giving birth to a daughter she'd named Sarah. Jack had raised that girl alone, and for a while, the town had whispered that maybe fatherhood would gentle him, make him less of what he was. It hadn't. If anything, having someone to protect had made him more dangerous, more willing to solve problems with bullets. Until that terrible day 2 years ago when Sarah, just 8 years old, had been caught in the crossfire of a shootout Jack had provoked. A stray bullet, not even his, but he'd started the fight that spawned it, had found her small body and stolen her breath before the doctor could even arrive. They'd buried Sarah on Jack's ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree where she'd loved to read. And Jack had buried his guns with her, or so everyone thought. He'd disappeared from town life, working his ranch alone, speaking to no one, becoming a ghost haunting the edges of Redemption Creek's story. Just like Eva had become a ghost after Thomas died 3 years back, shot during a bank robbery by men whose faces she'd never seen and whose names she'd never learned. Widowhood had given her a strange kind of freedom, no longer beholden to anyone's expectations, no longer required to smile or socialize or pretend that life was anything other than an endurance test. She'd bought the boarding house with Thomas's life insurance money and retreated into work, into silence, into the safety of not feeling anything too deeply. For 2 years, she and Jack had existed in the same small town without speaking, two broken people carefully avoiding each other's eyes during the rare times their paths crossed. Eva told herself it was better this way, that the love she'd felt at 19 was just youthful foolishness, that walking away had been the right choice, that her quiet life was what she'd wanted all along. Then Dalton Reeves had swaggered into the Lucky Dollar Saloon 3 days ago and destroyed that carefully constructed lie. "Heard there's a legend in this town," Reeves had announced, his voice carrying through the swinging doors and out into the street where Eva had been walking past. "Heard Black Jack Thornton used to be somebody. I used to be fast." The saloon had gone quiet. Every man there knew what was coming. "But I also heard," Reeves continued, and Eva had stopped walking despite herself, despite knowing she should keep moving, should get away from whatever was about to happen, that he hung up his guns. Went soft. All because some little girl got herself killed. "You should leave." Someone had said Eva thought it was Samuel, the blacksmith. "Just mount up and ride out. Nothing good comes from this." Reeves had laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I'm not here just for the washed-up legend. See, I also heard about a woman in this town. A widow woman who used to belong to Black Jack before he let her slip away. Evangeline Morrison, they call her. Some folks say she's cursed, that death follows her around like a loyal dog." Another laugh. "I figure once I put Jack in the ground, I'll see if she remembers what a real man feels like. See if I can't break that curse wide open." Eva had felt the words like a physical blow, had pressed one hand against the saloon's exterior wall to keep from staggering. Inside, she'd heard chairs scraping, boots hitting floorboards, the sound of men creating distance from something that was about to explode. "You got something to say?" A new voice had cut through the tension. Jack's voice, rougher than she remembered but still carrying that particular quality that had always made her breath catch. "You say it to me. You leave her name out of your filth mouth." Eva hadn't waited to hear more. She'd walked quickly back to the boarding house, climbed the stairs to her private quarters, and locked the door. But she couldn't lock out the knowledge of what was coming, couldn't unhear the promise of violence in Dalton Reeves's voice or the cold certainty in Jack's response. She'd known, with the kind of knowing that lives in your bones, that Jack would challenge Reeves. That Jack, who'd sworn off gunfighting, who'd buried his weapons with his daughter, would strap on his guns one final time. Not for pride, not for reputation, but because Dalton Reeves had threatened her, and some insults could only be answered with blood. For 3 days, the town had held its breath. Reeves had made his camp at the saloon, drinking and laughing and making crude comments about what he'd do to Eva once Jack was dead. Jack had disappeared to his ranch, presumably to dig up the guns he'd buried, to remember how to kill. And Eva had done nothing, had said nothing, had hidden in her boarding house like a coward while 2 men prepared to kill each other over words that had been spoken about her. Until this morning, when Sheriff Hayes had knocked on her door, his hat in his hands and defeat in his eyes. "They are meeting at 6, he'd said without preamble. "Main Street. I can't stop it, Eva. I'm sorry. I tried talking to Jack, but he won't listen. Says some debts can only be paid in blood. He's going to die," Eva had heard herself say, her voice flat and hollow. "Reeves is younger, faster. Jack hasn't practiced in 2 years. He's going to die in that street, and it's my fault." "It's Reeves's fault," Hayes had corrected gently. "He's the one who came here looking for a reputation. He's the one who spoke your name like it was his to speak. Jack's just responding the only way he knows how." After the sheriff left, Eva had spent the day paralyzed, unable to act but unable to hide. She'd thought about running to Jack's ranch, begging him not to do this. She'd thought about confronting Reeves herself, telling him she wasn't worth dying over. She'd thought about leaving town entirely, removing herself as the excuse for this violence. But she'd done none of those things. Because deep down, in a place she was ashamed to acknowledge, she wanted to see it. Wanted to know if Jack Thornton would really risk everything including his life for a woman he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Wanted to know if the love they'd shared as foolish kids had survived 2 decades of silence and separate lives and marriages to other people. So now she stood on her balcony, watching the 2 men face each other in the dying light, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was about to watch the only man she'd ever truly loved die in the dust of a street that had seen too much blood already. The church bell began to toll. 1, 2, 3. Eva's hands tightened on the railing. 4, 5. Jack's right hand flexed beside his gun. 6. Both men drew. The sound of gunfire cracked across Redemption Creek like the voice of God pronouncing judgment. The gunshots echoed off the buildings, bouncing between storefronts and homes like accusations searching for someone to blame. Eva watched it all happen in the stretched-out time that accompanies tragedy. The way both men's hands blurred toward their weapons, the way fire and smoke erupted from the barrels, the way destiny was written in thunder and lead. Black Jack Thornton was fast. Even after 2 years without practice, even with the rust of grief and guilt slowing his draw, he was still faster than most men would ever be. In his prime, he'd been a legend. Now he was merely exceptional. But Dalton Reeves was something else entirely. He was young and practiced, and the kind of speed that came from killing so often it became muscle memory. His guns cleared leather a heartbeat before Jack's, and that heartbeat was the difference between life and death. 2 bullets flew. One buried itself harmlessly in the wooden wall of the general store behind where Jack had been standing. The other found its target with the precision of a rattlesnake strike. Jack staggered backward, his left hand flying to his chest where crimson was already blooming through his white shirt like some obscene flower. The impact drove him to one knee, and Eva heard herself make a sound not quite a scream, more like the noise a wounded animal makes when it knows it's dying. "No," she whispered, though no one could hear her over the ringing silence that followed the shots. "No, please, no." Jack's guns fell from his hands, hitting the dust with soft thuds that seemed impossibly loud. He dropped to both knees now, swaying, his face gone gray beneath his tan. Blood was running between his fingers where he pressed his hand to the wound, running down to stain the street beneath him. Dalton Reeves holstered his weapons with a flourish, that terrible grin spreading wider across his face. "Guess the legend wasn't so legendary after all," he called out, his voice carrying to every corner of the frozen crowd. Then he looked up at Eva's balcony, meeting her eyes directly. "Don't you worry, sweetheart. I'll be up to console you real soon. Widows need comforting, I hear." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved to stop him. Sheriff Hayes had his hand on his own gun, but what could he do? It had been a fair fight, as fair as any gunfight ever was. The law couldn't touch Reeves for this. Reeves started walking toward the boarding house, toward Eva, his spurs jingling with each step. 3 paces. 4. But he didn't make it to 5. Because Black Jack Thornton, bleeding and dying in the street, had one more move left to make. With his right hand, the hand that had killed 17 men in fair fights and probably a dozen more in fights that weren't fair at all, Jack reached for the Remington he'd dropped. His movements were slow, pain making them clumsy, but his eyes were clear. Focused. He raised the gun with a trembling arm, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The bullet didn't hit Dalton Reeves. It hit the support beam holding up the saloon's awning directly above Reeves's head. The wood exploded in a shower of splinters. The beam cracked with a sound like breaking bones, and the entire awning 200 pounds of wood and corrugated iron collapsed with a groaning shriek of tortured nails and lumber. Dalton Reeves had just enough time to look up, just enough time to see death falling toward him, before the structure crashed down on top of him like the hammer of God. The impact was tremendous, raising a cloud of dust that obscured everything for a moment. When it cleared, Reeves was pinned beneath the wreckage, his legs trapped under a massive beam, his torso crushed under sheets of iron. He was screaming high, thin sounds that were barely human, sounds that spoke of pain beyond imagining. The crowd stood frozen, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Black Jack Thornton had lost the draw. Should be dying in the street while his killer walked away victorious. But the gunslinger's final shot had been smarter than fast, and had changed everything in a way that defied every rule of how these things were supposed to go. Eva didn't remember deciding to move. One moment she was on the balcony, the next she was running down the stairs, her black skirts gathered in her fists, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. She burst through the boarding house's front door and into the street, barely hearing Sheriff Hayes calling her name, barely seeing the crowd parting to let her through. Jack had collapsed onto his side, his breathing harsh and wet, blood pooling beneath him in the dust. His eyes were closed, his face slack, and for one terrible moment Eva thought she was too late, that he'd already slipped away to wherever legends go when they die. "Jack," she gasped, falling to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his body, not sure where to touch, how to help. "Jack," Please, don't you dare. His eyes opened. Gray eyes that had once been sharp as winter ice but now held only pain and something that looked like relief. Eva, he breathed, and blood bubbled at the corners of his mouth. You're safe now. He can't hurt you. You fool, she whispered, and the tears came then, hot and fast, cutting tracks through the dust on her face. You damned fool. Why? Why would you do this? Had to. Each word seemed to cost him, his chest hitching with the effort of breathing. Some debts can only be paid in blood. The crowd was pressing closer now. Eva was vaguely aware of Sheriff Hayes kneeling on Jack's other side, of Doc Patterson pushing through with his medical bag, of half the town gathering around to witness the death of Black Jack Thornton. Dalton Reeves had stopped screaming, passed out or dead. Eva didn't know and didn't care. Doc Patterson examined the wound with practiced hands, his expression growing grimmer with each passing second. He met Eva's eyes and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. The bullet had gone clean through, but it had taken important things with it. Things Jack couldn't live without. How long? Sheriff Hayes asked quietly. Minutes, Doc Patterson replied. Maybe less. I'm sorry, Jack. There's nothing I can do. Jack's hand found Eva's, his grip surprisingly strong despite the blood he was losing. Closer, he said, his voice barely a whisper now. Need to tell you something. Just you. Eva glanced at the watching crowd, her face marked with morbid curiosity, everyone leaning in to catch the famous gunslinger's last words. She looked back at Jack, at this man who'd been willing to die for her, and made a decision. Give us a moment, she said, her voice carrying more authority than she knew she possessed. Please. Sheriff Hayes stood, gesturing for the crowd to step back. You heard her. Give them some privacy. A man's dying words are his own business. To Doc Patterson, check on Reeves. See if he's going to make it. The crowd retreated reluctantly, forming a loose circle that gave the illusion of privacy while everyone strained to hear whatever was about to be said. But Eva didn't care anymore. Let them watch. Let them wonder. All that mattered was the man dying in her arms and whatever he needed to say before he left this world forever. She bent down, her ear close to Jack's lips, close enough that his blood smeared across her cheek. His breath was hot against her skin, growing shallower with each passing moment. 3 things, Jack whispered, each word an effort that took something vital from him. 3 things you need to know. Before I go. I'm listening, Eva said, her tears falling onto his face. I'm here, Jack. I'm listening. First. He coughed, more blood staining his lips. Sarah. My daughter. She wasn't. Catherine's. Not really. Eva went still, confusion cutting through her grief. What do you mean? Your sister. Elizabeth. Jack's eyes found hers, held them. She came to me, after you married Thomas. Said she was pregnant. Said the father wouldn't marry her. Begged me for help. Eva's breath caught. Elizabeth. Her younger sister, who'd died 7 years ago in childbirth. Who'd never revealed who had fathered her baby. The baby that had died with her, or so everyone believed. I took her in, Jack continued, his words coming faster now as if he knew his time was running out. Married her, in name only. To give the child a father. To save her reputation. But she died, bringing Sarah into the world. The baby lived. So I raised her, as mine. Sarah was Elizabeth's daughter. Eva's voice was hollow with shock. My niece. I never told you. Thought it would hurt too much. Thought you'd blame me for not saving Elizabeth. For letting Sarah die too. A sob caught in his throat. But I loved that girl. I loved her like she was my own. And when she died, when that bullet found her, it killed the last good thing in me. Eva's mind was reeling. Sarah, the little girl she'd seen from a distance in town, the child she'd mourned as a stranger's daughter had been her own flesh and blood. And Jack had carried that secret alone for 8 years, protecting Eva from a truth he thought would destroy her. Second thing, Jack gasped, and Eva forced herself to focus, to push aside the revelation and listen. My money. From the gunfighting days. Everyone thinks. I spent it. On drink, on gambling. But I saved it. Every dollar. He coughed again, harder this time, his body spasming with pain. Buried it, on my ranch. Under the big cottonwood, where Sarah's grave is. $15,000, in gold. 15,000. It was a fortune, more money than most men in Redemption Creek would see in a lifetime. Jack. It's yours, he interrupted. Use it for good. For children like Sarah, who get caught in men's violence. Build something that matters. Promise me. I promise, Eva said, the words automatic, her mind still trying to process everything he was telling her. I promise, Jack, but… Third thing. His grip on her hand tightened, his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed impossible for a dying man. Most important thing. Eva, I need you to know. He paused, gathering his strength for what he needed to say. Eva waited, her heart breaking with every labored breath he took. Loving you, Jack whispered, was the only good thing. I never did. In a life full of bad choices. Full of death and regret. Loving you, that was real. That was pure. And walking away, 20 years ago, biggest mistake a man could make. Jack, no. Let me finish. Blood was running freely from his mouth now, staining his teeth red. I know, you made the right choice. Marrying Thomas. Having a safe life. I would have destroyed you. The violence in me, it would have poisoned everything we had. But that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Not for one day. Not for 1 hour. Eva was sobbing openly now, not caring who saw, who heard. I loved you too. I never stopped. Even when I married Thomas, even when I convinced myself it was better this way, I know. Jack's smile was heartbreaking in its sadness and its peace. Always knew. Saw it in your eyes. Every time we passed in town. Every Sunday, at church. We were always 2 stars, circling each other. Never colliding. His breathing was growing more labored, the pauses between breaths stretching longer. Eva could feel him slipping away, could feel the life leaving him like water through her fingers. This, Jack said, his voice barely audible now. Dying to protect you, it's the only way. I could make it right. The only way to prove that loving you mattered more than anything else. Than pride, or reputation, or even my life. You don't have to prove anything, Eva said desperately. You don't have to. Some debts can only be paid in blood. Jack's eyes were starting to glaze over, his focus drifting. But some love can only be proven in sacrifice. I'm glad it was for you. Glad my last act was something good. Something that matters. Jack. Eva pressed her forehead to his, not caring about the blood, the dirt, the watching crowd. Jack, please, don't go. Don't leave me again. I can't. You can, he breathed. You're stronger than you know. Build something beautiful with what I'm leaving you. Turn my blood money into mercy. Turn my violence into peace. Promise me, Eva. Promise. I promise, Eva sobbed. I promise, Jack. I'll build something beautiful. I'll honor Sarah. I'll honor Elizabeth. I'll honor you. Not me. His smile was fading now, his eyes closing. Don't honor me. I was a killer. A broken man. But honor what we could have been. If I'd been better. If I'd been brave enough to choose differently. His chest rose one last time, fell, and didn't rise again. His hand went slack in Eva's grip. And Black Jack Thornton legend, killer, father, and the only man Evangeline Morrison had ever truly loved died in the dust of Redemption Creek's main street with a smile on his scarred face. Eva sat there, cradling his head in her lap, her tears mixing with his blood on the ground beneath them. The crowd was silent around her, every person caught in the weight of what they'd witnessed. Not just a gunfight. Not just the death of a legend. But something more was a final act of love from a man the world had deemed beyond redemption. Sheriff Hayes approached slowly, gently. Eva. We need to. He's gone, Eva. She knew. God help her, she knew. But lifting him, releasing him, accepting it as final was different. That required strength she wasn't sure she possessed. But she'd promised. Promised to build something beautiful from this tragedy. Promised to turn his violence into peace. And Eva Morrison, despite everything this territory had taken from her, had never broken a promise in her life. She carefully lowered Jack's head to the ground, closed his eyes with trembling fingers, and stood. Her black dress was soaked with his blood, her face streaked with tears and dust, but she stood tall. Looked around at the watching crowd with eyes that held a new fire, a new purpose. Someone get the undertaker, she said, her voice steady despite the breaking of her heart. And someone dig up whatever's left of Dalton Reeves. This street has seen enough death for one day. As the crowd began to disperse, as Doc Patterson confirmed what everyone already knew, as the undertaker's wagon rolled up to collect the bodies, Eva stood alone in the center of that blood-stained street and made a vow. Jack Thornton had given her 3 secrets in his dying breath. She would honor all of them, would use his buried gold to build something that would echo long after the memory of his guns had faded, would tell the truth about Sarah and Elizabeth, would give them the recognition in death they'd been denied in life. And she would prove that love, even love that couldn't survive, even love separated by 20 years of silence, was stronger than death, stronger than violence, stronger than any bullet a man could fire. But first, she had to survive the grief that was threatening to drown her. The sun had set completely now, leaving Redemption Creek in darkness. Eva walked back to her boarding house alone, climbed the stairs to her private quarters, and locked the door behind her. Then, and only then, did she allow herself to break completely. For 3 days, Eva Morrison didn't leave her room. She didn't eat. I barely slept. Just sat in the chair by her window, staring out at the street where Jack had died, replaying his final words in her mind until they became a prayer, a curse, a promise she didn't know how to keep. The boarding house ran itself, more or less. Her tenants, 3 traveling salesmen and a schoolteacher passing through on her way to California, knew to leave her alone. They'd seen the blood on her dress when she'd walked through the door that terrible night. They'd heard the sounds of her grief through the thin walls. They understood that some wounds needed time and silence to begin healing, if they ever healed at all. On the morning of the 4th day, there was a knock at her door. Soft, hesitant, but persistent. "Mrs. Morrison." A woman's voice, familiar but not immediately placeable. "It's Josephine Hayes, the sheriff's wife. I've brought you some food, and, well, there are some things that need attending to. May I come in?" Eva looked at herself in the mirror across the room. Her hair was wild, her face gaunt, her dress still the same black dress, still stained with Jack's blood, wrinkled and filthy. She looked like a woman who'd died but forgotten to lie down. Maybe that's exactly what she was. "Just a moment," Eva called, her voice hoarse from disuse and crying. She moved to the wash basin, splashed cold water on her face, and tried to make herself presentable. It was a losing battle, but she fought it anyway. Some habits were too ingrained to break, even in grief. She opened the door to find Josephine Hayes standing there with a basket of food and an expression of such profound sympathy that Eva almost slammed the door shut again. She couldn't handle kindness right now. Kindness would break what little composure she'd managed to gather. "Please," Josephine said quickly, as if sensing Eva's impulse to retreat. "I won't stay long. But you need to eat, and there are arrangements that need to be made." Arrangements. The word was so clinical, so distant from the reality it represented. Jack's body, lying in the undertaker's back room, waiting for someone to decide what happened next. Eva stepped aside, let Josephine enter. The woman set the basket on the small table by the window, began unpacking bread, cheese, cold chicken, and preserves. The kind of food you brought to funerals and wakes. The kind meant to sustain life when life seemed impossible to sustain. "The funeral is tomorrow," Josephine said gently. 1 o'clock. "Sheriff Hayes thought you should know, in case you wanted to attend. Or not attend. Either choice would be understood." Eva sank into her chair. "Who's paying for it?" "The town." Josephine poured water from a pitcher into a glass, pressed it into Eva's hands. Whatever else Jack Thornton was, he was part of Redemption Creek. "We take care of our own, even in death. Especially in death." "Where will he be buried?" "On his ranch. Under the cottonwood tree, next to his daughter." Josephine paused, seeming to be choosing her words carefully. "There's been talk, Eva, about what Jack said to you before he died. People are curious. Let them be curious." Eva's voice was sharp, harder than she'd intended. Jack's last words were his own. "They are not entertainment for gossip mongers who want to pick apart a dead man's secrets." "I agree." Josephine sat in the chair across from Eva, her expression earnest. "And I've told everyone who's asked that they should mind their own business. But Eva, there's more than just curiosity at work here. Jack's ranch belongs to someone now. His will needs to be read, his affairs settled. And you were the last person he spoke to. If he had any final wishes about his property, about his belongings." Eva took a sip of water, buying herself time to think. Jack had told her about the gold buried under the cottonwood tree. $15,000 in blood money that he'd saved for 8 years, waiting for some purpose to give it meaning. He'd told her to use it for good, to build something that mattered. But had he put that in a will? Had he made any legal provisions? Or had his final words been the only testament to his wishes? "I need to see his ranch," Eva heard herself say. "Before the funeral. Before anyone else tramples through looking for valuables or claiming what isn't theirs." Josephine nodded slowly. "Sheriff Hayes can take you out there this afternoon, if you'd like. Make sure everything is secure." "Thank you." Eva set down the glass, folded her hands in her lap to stop them from trembling. "And Josephine, thank you for the food. For the kindness. I know I'm not easy to be kind to right now. Grief never is." Josephine stood, moved toward the door. "But you're not alone in it, Eva. This whole town mourns Jack Thornton, whatever his sins. And we'll stand with you through whatever comes next." After Josephine left, Eva forced herself to eat. The food tasted like ash, but she ate anyway, mechanically, knowing she'd need strength for what lay ahead. Then she washed, changed into a clean black dress. She owned 6 of them now, a wardrobe built on widowhood, and prepared herself to visit the ranch where Jack had tried to build a life after violence. The ranch where his daughter was buried. Her niece. Elizabeth's child. The ranch where $15,000 in gold waited under the earth. A fortune built on death that Jack had wanted transformed into life. Sheriff Hayes arrived at 2 o'clock with a horse and buggy. He was a good man, Hayes in his late 40s, with gray threading through his brown hair and eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst impulses but somehow remained kind. He'd been sheriff of Redemption Creek for 12 years, had known both Eva and Jack since before their failed engagement, had watched their parallel lives with what Eva suspected was equal parts sympathy and frustration. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her into the buggy. "No," Eva admitted. "But let's go anyway." The ride out to Jack's ranch took 30 minutes, following a road that wound through scrubland and scattered cottonwoods. The land was harsh here, unforgiving, the kind of territory that broke weak men and made strong men harder. Jack had bought this property 10 years ago, had built a small house and barn with his own hands, had tried to carve out something honest from soil that seemed determined to grow only stones and regret. "Did you know?" Hayes asked after they'd ridden in silence for several minutes. "About Jack and your sister." So word had spread. Eva wasn't surprised. In a town the size of Redemption Creek, secrets had a half-life measured in hours, not days. "No," Eva said quietly. "I had no idea Elizabeth's baby survived. No idea Jack had raised Sarah as his own. He never said a word, not in 8 years." "That must hurt," Hayes observed, "knowing he kept that from you." "It does. But I understand why." Eva watched the landscape roll past, empty and eternal. "He thought the truth would cause me pain. Thought it was kinder to let me believe Sarah was a stranger's child rather than my own niece. He was trying to protect me, in his way. By lying. By carrying the burden alone." Eva glanced at the sheriff. That was always Jack's way. He'd take on any weight, shoulder any responsibility, rather than ask for help. Even when the weight was crushing him. They crested a small rise, and Jack's ranch came into view. It was modest, a 2-room cabin built of logs and stone, a barn that had seen better days, a chicken coop that was empty now, the birds probably scattered or dead. But there was care evident in the construction, pride in the straight lines and solid foundations. This wasn't the home of a careless man. It was the dwelling of someone trying to build something permanent in a temporary world. And there, about 50 yards from the cabin, stood the cottonwood tree. Massive and ancient, its branches spread wide despite the season, its roots running deep into earth that had drunk too much blood over the years. At its base, 2 markers. One was carved stone, professionally done, reading Sarah Catherine Thornton, 1875 to 1883, beloved daughter. The other was simpler, a wooden cross with Catherine Thornton, 1857 to 1875, rest in peace burned into its surface. Tomorrow, there will be a 3rd grave under that tree. And then Jack's family would be complete in death in a way they'd never managed in life. Hayes helped Eva down from the buggy, and they approached the cabin together. The door was unlocked. No one locked doors this far from town. And what did Jack have worth stealing anyway? Eva pushed it open, and the hinges creaked in protest, unused to visitors. The interior was sparse but clean. A table and 2 chairs. A narrow bed against one wall, neatly made. A fireplace with cold ashes. Shelves holding more books than Eva would have expected from a man who'd made his reputation with guns instead of words. She moved closer, reading the spines. Shakespeare. Dickens. Mark Twain. A collection of poetry by Walt Whitman, worn from repeated readings. On the table sat a single photograph in a simple wooden frame. Eva picked it up, her breath catching. It showed a young girl, Sarah, unmistakably, with Elizabeth's eyes and smile but Jack's stubborn chin. She was perhaps 6 in the photograph, wearing a simple dress, holding a book in her small hands. She looked happy, loved, like a child who'd known, even briefly, what it meant to be safe. He read to her every night, Hayes said quietly from the doorway. Used to see them in town sometimes, coming back from the general store with new books. She'd chatter about the stories, and Jack would listen like she was reciting gospel. Eva set the photograph down carefully, afraid she might shatter it with the force of her grief. How did he bear it? Losing her. I don't think he did bear it, Hayes replied. I think it broke something in him that was already cracked. The gunfighting, the violence that was just who he was, or who he'd become. But Sarah, she was his chance at redemption. His proof that he could create something instead of just destroying it. When she died, the sheriff shook his head. There was nothing left to redeem. Eva moved through the small cabin, opening drawers, looking in cabinets, searching for something though she didn't know what. A will, maybe. A letter. Some legal document that would confirm what Jack had told her in his dying breath. She found nothing. No will. No bank statements. No records of the supposed fortune buried under the cottonwood tree. Just a man's sparse possessions and the ghost of a life that had ended before it could become what it was meant to be. Eva, Hayes called from outside. You should see this. She joined him by the cottonwood tree. He was standing beside Sarah's grave, pointing to the ground near the base of the tree. The earth here is different. Looser. Like it's been dug up and filled in recently. Eva's heart began to race. She looked around, spotted a shovel leaning against the barn. Help me dig. Eva, we can't just. He told me it was here. She was already moving toward the shovel. The gold. $15,000 buried beneath this tree. He told me to use it for good, to build something that mattered. Help me dig, Sheriff, or get out of my way. Hayes studied her for a long moment, then sighed. If anyone asks, I knew nothing about this. If anyone asks, it's none of their damn business. They dug for 20 minutes, the work harder than Eva expected. The earth was packed solid despite its recent disturbance, and neither of them was particularly experienced with manual labor. But finally, Eva's shovel hit something that wasn't dirt or rock. Something that made a hollow, metallic sound. A small chest, perhaps 2 feet long and a foot wide, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. Hayes helped her pull it free, set it on the ground between them. Eva's hands trembled as she unwrapped the cloth, found the clasp that held the chest closed. Inside, gold coins. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, gleaming dully in the afternoon sun. More money than Eva had ever seen in one place. More money than most people in Redemption Creek would earn in a lifetime of hard work. Blood money. Every coin paid for a life taken, a widow made, a child orphaned. Jack Thornton's legacy, bought and paid for with violence. But it didn't have to stay that way. Jack had given it to her for a purpose, and had trusted her to transform it into something clean. Something that saved lives instead of ending them. Lord have mercy, Hayes breathed. He really did save it. Every dollar. Eva closed the chest, wrapped it back in the oilcloth. Can you help me load this into the buggy? Eva, this is a fortune. If word gets out, then we make sure words don't get out. She met his eyes steadily. This money belongs to the children who suffer because of men like Jack used to be. It belongs to the widows who lose husbands to violence. It belongs to anyone who's been hurt by the kind of world that creates gunslingers and celebrates killers. I'm going to use it exactly as Jack asked, to build something good from something terrible. Hayes nodded slowly. What are you thinking? An orphanage. A home, Eva corrected. For lost souls who have nowhere else to go. Orphans, yes. But also widows. Women fleeing violent men. Anyone who needs sanctuary. She looked at the graves beneath the cottonwood tree. I'll call it the Thornton Morrison Home for Lost Souls. In memory of Sarah, Elizabeth, and Jack. 3 people who died because of violence, whose deaths will fund a refuge from violence. It's a good dream, Hayes said gently. But Eva, do you have any idea how much work something like that requires? The permits, the construction, the daily operations. It's not just about having money. It's about having time, energy, expertise. Then I'll learn. Eva's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I'll hire people who know what they are doing. I'll work myself to exhaustion if that's what it takes. But I made Jack a promise, Sheriff. And I keep my promises. They loaded the chest into the buggy, covering it with a blanket to hide it from curious eyes. As they prepared to leave, Eva took one last look at the ranch. At the cabin where Jack had tried to be a father instead of a killer. At the tree where his daughter rested and where he would rest tomorrow. I'm going to buy this property, she announced. Whatever it takes. This land, this house, these graves, they are part of what I'm building. The home will be here, where Jack tried to make his stand against the violence in his soul. Hayes nodded. I'll make inquiries about the estate. See who has claimed it now that Jack's gone. As they rode back toward Redemption Creek, Eva felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, a permanent weight in her chest. But alongside it now was the purpose. Direction. The beginning of a plan that would take Jack's violence and transform it into peace. She'd spent 3 years as a ghost after Thomas died. 3 years existing but not living, breathing but not truly alive. She'd let widowhood define her, had retreated into silence and isolation because it felt safer than risking her heart again. But Jack's death had taught her something Thomas's death hadn't. That life was too short and too precious to waste on safety. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was build something beautiful from terrible raw materials. That love, even love that ended in tragedy, was still worth the pain it cost. Tomorrow she will attend Jack's funeral. Would watch them lower into the ground the only man she'd ever truly loved. Would hear the Reverend speak platitudes about a man he'd never understood and probably feared. But after tomorrow, she will begin building. Would take Jack's blood money and turn it into a sanctuary. Would honor his dying wish and, in doing so, honor the love they'd shared and lost and never quite let go. The sun was setting as they reached Redemption Creek, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that reminded Eva too much of blood and endings. But sunsets, she reminded herself, were just preludes to sunrise. And tomorrow, after the funeral, after the grief, after the final goodbye, she would begin the work of transforming death into life. It was what Jack had asked of her. What Sarah and Elizabeth deserved. What the broken, violent world they'd left behind needed more than anything. And Eva Morrison, widow twice over but defeated never, would make it happen or die trying. The funeral was smaller than Eva expected. Perhaps 20 people gathered under the cottonwood tree on Jack's ranch, soon to be Eva's ranch, if the lawyers could untangle the estate quickly enough. Sheriff Hayes and his wife Josephine. Doc Patterson. The undertaker. A handful of ranch hands who'd worked for Jack over the years. And, surprisingly, 3 women Eva didn't recognize, dressed in faded calico and worn shawls, standing apart from the main group. Reverend Walsh spoke the expected words about dust and ashes, about redemption and grace, about how even the worst sinner could find salvation in Christ. Eva barely heard him. She stood at the edge of the grave they'd dug that morning, watching the simple pine coffin that held what was left of Black Jack Thornton, and thought about all the things that would never be said, never be done, never be resolved. He saved my boy, one of the calico women said suddenly, interrupting the reverend mid-prayer. 2 years back, when Jimmy got trampled by a horse. Jack rode all night to fetch Doc Patterson, carrying my son in his own arms to the doctor's office. Wouldn't accept payment, wouldn't accept thanks. Just tipped his hat and rode away. The second woman nodded. My husband died in a mining accident. Left me with 3 children and debts I couldn't pay. Jack bought those debts, then tore up the papers. Said no woman should lose her home because a mountain fell on her man. He wasn't what people thought, the third woman added, her voice thick with emotion. Wasn't just a killer. He was kind, in his way. Quiet about it, but kind. Eva felt tears threatening again. These women knew a Jack Thornton she'd never seen, the man who'd tried to balance the violence in his soul with acts of mercy no one knew about. The man who'd saved his money not for himself but for some future purpose that would matter. Thank you, Eva said to them. For coming. For telling me this. After the burial, after the last shovelful of dirt had been tamped down over Jack's grave, after the mourners had drifted away to their wagons and horses, Eva stood alone under the cottonwood tree. 3 graves now, 3 people bound by blood and tragedy and love that had never quite found its proper expression. I'm going to do it, she whispered to the fresh-turned earth. Everything you asked. The home, the sanctuary, all of it. I'm going to make your death mean something, Jack. I'm going to make all your deaths mean something. The wind rustled through the cottonwood's branches, and Eva chose to believe it was an answer. Within a week, Eva had purchased Jack's ranch for a sum that shocked the town. She'd paid cash, from the gold Jack had buried. though she let everyone believe it was money she'd saved from running the boarding house. She hired a lawyer from Phoenix to handle the paperwork, to establish the legal framework for what she was building. The Thornton Morrison Home for Lost Souls would be a charitable institution, funded by private donations and the mysterious fortune Eva had somehow acquired. It would house orphans and widows, provide education and vocational training, offer sanctuary to anyone fleeing violence or destitution. The town was skeptical at first. Some said Eva was crazy with grief, that she'd squander her money on a foolish dream that would fail within a year. Others whispered darker things, that the money wasn't really hers, that she'd stolen it somehow, that Black Jack's blood was on every coin and it would curse anyone who touched it. But Eva Morrison, who'd spent 3 years as a ghost and 20 years avoiding her own desires, had discovered something powerful in Jack's dying words. She no longer cared what people thought. She had a purpose now, a mission that mattered more than reputation or respectability or the comfortable numbness she'd wrapped around herself like armor. She began construction in October, hiring every able-bodied carpenter in 3 counties. The original cabin would be preserved as private quarters for the superintendent Eva herself, at least initially. But around it would rise a larger structure, dormitories for the children, private rooms for the widows, a dining hall, a schoolroom, a chapel. "You're building a castle," Sheriff Hayes observed one afternoon, watching the framework rise against the autumn sky. "I'm building hope," Eva corrected. "There's a difference." By December, the basic structure was complete. By February, the interior was finished, simple but sturdy, built to last. And in March of 1884, exactly 6 months after Jack's death, the Thornton Morrison Home for Lost Souls opened its doors to its first residents, 3 orphaned sisters whose parents had died of cholera, and 2 widows fleeing husbands who'd preferred fists to words. Eva threw herself into the work with a fervor that worried her friends. She was up before dawn, managing the household, teaching the children, counseling the widows, handling the endless paperwork that came with running a charitable institution. She fell into bed exhausted each night, too tired to dream, too busy to grieve. It was exactly what she needed. "You're going to work yourself to death," Josephine Hayes warned one evening, finding Eva in the office long after everyone else had gone to bed. "You haven't taken a day of rest in months." "I don't need rest," Eva replied, not looking up from the ledger she was updating. "I need purpose." This, she gestured at the papers covering her desk. "This is my purpose. Jack wouldn't want you to destroy yourself by building his monument. This isn't a monument." Eva set down her pen, met Josephine's concerned eyes. "Monuments are for the dead. This is for the living, for the children who need homes, the women who need safety, the people who've been crushed by the same kind of violence that defined Jack's life. If I work myself to exhaustion making sure they have a future, that's not destruction. That's redemption." Josephine was quiet for a moment. "You loved him very much, didn't you? Even after all those years apart?" "Yes," Eva admitted. "God help me, yes. And maybe that's why this matters so much, because I can't bring him back, can't undo his death or the 20 years we lost. But I can make sure his final act of love created something that echoes long after we're both gone." The months turned to years. The Thornton Morrison home grew, both in physical size and in reputation. By 1886, they housed 23 children and 15 widows. By 1888, they'd expanded again, adding a second building specifically for vocational training, teaching women skills that would allow them to support themselves, teaching children trades that would carry them into adulthood. Eva never remarried. Never even considered it. She wore black always, a permanent widow to 2 men she'd loved in different ways: Thomas, who'd given her safety, and Jack, who'd given her purpose. The town stopped whispering about her grief, her obsession, her unwillingness to move on. They saw what she'd built, saw the lives she'd saved, and they began to understand that some loves transcended death, some purposes mattered more than personal happiness. What would you do if someone's dying wish gave your life new meaning? Would you embrace it fully, or try to balance it with your own dreams? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Every September 17th, Eva visited the 3 graves under the cottonwood tree. She brought flowers and wildflowers she picked herself from the land Jack had loved. She stood there in silence, updating them on the work, on the children, on the lives that had been saved because of the fortune Jack had buried and the love he'd sacrificed everything to protect. "We have 37 residents now," she told the graves on the 10th anniversary of Jack's death. 37 souls who have somewhere safe to sleep, something useful to do, someone who cares if they live or die. That's 37 reasons your death mattered, Jack. 37 proof that love is stronger than violence. The wind rustled through the cottonwood's branches. And Eva, older now but no less determined, smiled through her tears and got back to work. There was always more work to do. Always more souls to save. Always more proof needed that Black Jack Thornton's final act of love had changed the world in ways his guns never could. By 1893, 10 years after Jack's death, the Thornton Morrison home had become more than just a refuge, it had become a symbol. Towns across 3 territories sent their orphans and widows to Eva, trusting her with their most vulnerable. Newspapers wrote articles about the Angel of Redemption Creek, the widow who'd transformed a gunslinger's blood money into an empire of compassion. Eva hated the attention. She wasn't building monuments to herself or seeking recognition. She was simply keeping a promise to a dying man, honoring a love that had survived 20 years of separation and could survive eternity beyond death. But the attention brought something she hadn't anticipated: questions. It started with a reporter from the Phoenix Gazette who arrived one hot July afternoon, notebook in hand and curiosity in his eyes. His name was William Crawford, a man in his 30s with the kind of persistent politeness that masked an investigative instinct sharper than most people's guns. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, sitting across from her in the home's modest office, "I've been researching your story for months now. The transformation you've accomplished here is remarkable. But there's one question everyone asks and no one seems to know the answer to. Where did the money come from?" Eva had been expecting this question for 10 years. She'd prepared answers, built carefully constructed half-truths that would satisfy curiosity without revealing the whole story. But looking at this earnest young reporter, she found herself tired of the deception. "From Black Jack Thornton," she said simply. "He told me where to find it in his dying breath. $15,000 in gold, buried under the cottonwood tree where he and his daughter are now buried." Crawford's pencil stopped mid-scratch. "The gunslinger? Black Jack Thornton funded this place. Every dollar." Eva leaned back in her chair, watching his reaction. Money he'd earned over 15 years of killing. Money everyone assumed he'd spent on whiskey and gambling. But he saved it. All of it. Waiting for the right purpose. And that purpose was you. Crawford was writing now, fast and furious. The woman he'd loved and lost. The purpose was this. Eva gestured to the window, where children were playing in the yard under the watchful eyes of the widows who'd found purpose in caring for them. Sanctuary for the victims of men like he used to be. Redemption purchased with blood money. It's poetic, in its way. Some might say it's cursed, Crawford observed. Building something good on a foundation of violence. Some might say that's the only way good things ever get built. Eva met his eyes steadily. This territory was born in violence. Every town, every ranch, every life here exists because someone, somewhere, was willing to kill for it. The question isn't whether violence was involved. It always is. The question is what we do with what violence leaves behind. Crawford studied her for a long moment. "You loved him, Black Jack Thornton, even after he became a killer. I loved who he was before the killing defined him. And I loved who he tried to become after his daughter died." Eva's voice was soft now, memories pulling her back to that dusty street, to Jack's final smile. Love doesn't end just because someone becomes something you can't accept. It just exists. Suspended. Waiting for resolution that may never come. "Did you get your resolution? When he died protecting you?" "I got my purpose," Eva corrected. "Which might be better than resolution. Resolution is an ending. The purpose is the beginning." The article Crawford wrote appeared in the Phoenix Gazette 2 weeks later. It was fair, balanced, and it told the truth that the Thornton Morrison home had been built on Black Jack Thornton's savings, funded by a gunslinger's final act of love. Eva braced herself for scandal, for judgment, for people to pull their support from an institution tainted by such violent origins. Instead, donations increased. Letters poured in from across the territory and beyond from former gunslingers who wanted to follow Jack's example, from widows of violent men who saw hope in Eva's story, from ordinary people who understood that redemption was possible even for those who seemed beyond saving. "You've made him a hero," Sheriff Hayes said, reading one of the letters aloud in Eva's office. "Listen to this. Black Jack Thornton showed us that no man is too far gone to do one good thing. His story gives me hope that my own father, who died a drunk and a brawler, might have had good in him too. Eva, you've transformed how people see violence and redemption." "I've told the truth," Eva replied. "Nothing more. Jack wasn't a hero. He was a broken man who tried, at the very end, to do something right. That's not heroism. That's just humanity. But maybe that's what people need to see. That you don't have to be a saint to do good. You just have to be willing to try. That autumn brought an unexpected visitor. Eva was in the garden with 3 of the older girls, teaching them about herbs and medicinal plants, when a woman approached on horseback. She was perhaps 50, weathered by sun and hard living, dressed in clothes that had seen better days. But there was something familiar about her face, something that made Eva's breath catch. "Can I help you?" Eva asked, standing and brushing dirt from her skirt. The woman dismounted slowly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Mrs. Morrison? Evangeline Morrison?" "Yes. My name is Margaret Reeves." The woman's voice was steady, but her eyes held years of pain. "I'm Dalton Reeves's mother. The man Black Jack killed 10 years ago." Eva felt the girls tense beside her. Everyone in Redemption Creek knew that story, how Jack had brought down the saloon awning on Dalton Reeves, how the young gunslinger had died screaming in the street while Jack bled out nearby. "I see," Eva said carefully. "What brings you here, Mrs. Reeves?" "I wanted to see it." Margaret gestured to the buildings, the gardens, the children playing in the distance. "Wanted to see what came from my son's death. What Jack Thornton's death brought. I'm not sure I understand." Margaret's laugh was bitter. "My son was a rabid dog, Mrs. Morrison. I loved him because he was mine, but I knew what he was. Knew the things he'd done, the people he'd hurt. When word reached me that he'd died here, that Black Jack Thornton had killed him protecting you, my first thought was relief." She met Eva's eyes. "Is that terrible? To be relieved that your own child is dead?" "I've been thinking about what you said," Eva continued. "About how loving me was the only good thing you ever did. I used to think that it was sad that a man's whole life could be measured by one relationship, one feeling. But now I understand. It's not about the size of the good thing. It's about what you do with it. You took that love and turned it into this." She gestured toward the home. "Into sanctuary for 63 souls who would have been lost without it. That's not small, Jack. That's eternal. You talk to him often." Eva's eyes flew open. Sheriff Hayes stood a few feet away, hat in his hands, his own face lined with years now. He was nearly 70, still serving Redemption Creek because no one else wanted the job and he was too stubborn to quit. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you. Just came to tell you the territorial governor is coming to visit next month. I want to see the home, possibly provide official funding and recognition." "Official recognition." Eva smiled faintly. Jack would have found that funny. A gunslinger's legacy being celebrated by the government. Hayes sat beside her on the bench. "Can I ask you something I've wondered for 15 years?" "Of course. Do you regret it? Choosing to stay after Jack died? You could have left Redemption Creek, started fresh somewhere no one knew you or your history. But you stayed, built all this, gave up any chance at a normal life. Do you ever regret that choice?" Eva was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Do you know what Jack's last words to me were? Besides the practical things about the gold and Sarah. You never told anyone. He said loving me was the only good thing he'd ever done. That walking away from me 20 years earlier was his biggest mistake. That dying to protect me was the only way he could make it right." Eva's voice was steady despite the emotion beneath it. "And I realized, sitting there with his blood on my hands, that I'd made the same mistake. I'd walked away from him because I was afraid of his violence, afraid of losing him, afraid of feeling too much. And I'd spent 20 years playing it safe, being cautious, existing instead of living." She turned to Hayes. "So no, I don't regret staying. I don't regret building this place, or spending 15 years working myself to exhaustion, or giving up chances at remarriage or comfort or any of the normal things widows are supposed to want. Because Jack's death taught me something vital. That love isn't about safety or certainty or knowing how the story ends. It's about choosing to build something beautiful even when the foundation is terrible. It's about transforming what you're given into what the world needs." Hayes nodded slowly. "He'd be proud of you. Of what you've built. Maybe. But more importantly, I'm proud of myself. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of the choices I've made, the person I've become. That's what Jack's dying words gave me, not just a purpose, but permission to become who I was always meant to be." As the last light faded from the sky, Eva and Hayes sat in companionable silence beneath the cottonwood tree. Around them, the home Jack's gold had built was settling into evening routines, children being tucked into bed, widows finishing their mending by lamplight, the eternal rhythms of life continuing despite and because of the death that had made it all possible. "I won't live forever," Eva said quietly. "Another 10 years, maybe 15 if I'm lucky. What happens to this place when I'm gone? It continues, Hayes replied with certainty. You've built something bigger than yourself, Eva. You've trained staff, established protocols, created a legacy that will outlive us all. The Thornton Morrison home doesn't need you to survive anymore. That's how you know you succeeded. Eva hoped he was right. Hoped that when she finally joined Jack and Sarah and Elizabeth beneath this cottonwood tree, the work would continue. That children would still find safety here, widows would still find purpose, and Black Jack Thornton's blood money would keep buying redemption long after everyone who remembered him was dust. It was a good dream, a worthy goal. And Eva Morrison, who'd spent half her life as a ghost and the other half as a force of nature, intended to spend her remaining years making sure that dream became a permanent reality. She owed Jack that much, owed herself even more, and she always paid her debts. The territorial governor's visit in October 1898 changed everything. Governor Benjamin Murphy arrived with a delegation of officials and newspaper reporters, all curious to see the legendary Thornton Morrison home that had transformed Redemption Creek from an anonymous frontier town into a symbol of redemption. Eva greeted them in her simplest black dress, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her manner professional but warm. She gave them a tour of the facilities, the dormitories with their neat rows of beds, the schoolroom where 15 children were learning to read, the workshops where widows crafted goods they could sell for income, the small hospital where Doc Patterson's apprentice tended to illnesses and injuries. Remarkable, Governor Murphy said, watching a group of older girls working at looms in the textile workshop. Mrs. Morrison, in my 15 years as governor, I've never seen a charitable institution run with such efficiency and heart. Most orphanages are barely more than warehouses for unwanted children. But this is a home in the truest sense. That was always the goal, Eva replied. These aren't charity cases to be managed. They are human beings who deserve dignity, purpose, and the chance to build futures that aren't defined by the violence or poverty that brought them here. One of the reporters, a woman from the San Francisco Chronicle, pulled Eva aside during lunch. Mrs. Morrison, I've done my research. The story of how this place was funded Black Jack Thornton's gold, his dying words to you, the love story that couldn't survive but somehow saved dozens of lives, it's extraordinary. Have you ever considered writing it down? Publishing it? No, Eva said immediately. This isn't a romance novel or a dime store western. It's real life, real pain, real people who deserve privacy and respect. Jack's story isn't mine to sell for entertainment. But it could inspire others, the reporter pressed. Could encourage more people to support charitable works, to see redemption as possible even for the worst sinners. Eva was quiet for a moment, considering. Perhaps. But not yet. Not while the people in this story are still living, still healing. Maybe someday, when we're all gone and can't be hurt by how people interpret our choices, the story can be told. But not today. The governor's official report, published 2 weeks later, praised the Thornton Morrison home as a model for the entire territory. He recommended government funding to expand the work, to replicate it in other towns. He called Eva a pioneer of practical compassion and Jack Thornton a man who found redemption through sacrifice. The attention brought more donations, more residents, more opportunities. By 1900, the home had 82 residents and a waiting list. They'd begun construction on a third building, this one specifically for elderly widows who had nowhere else to go in their final years. But the attention also brought something Eva hadn't anticipated. Visitors who wanted to see Black Jack Thornton's grave, who treated it like a shrine to redemptive violence. They'd stand at the cottonwood tree, pose for photographs, and take pieces of bark as souvenirs. Some even tried to dig around Sarah's grave, convinced there was more gold buried beneath. Eva put a stop to it immediately. She had Sheriff Hayes now assisted by his son Thomas, who'd taken over most of the daily work post guards at the property line. She erected a fence around the 3 graves, put up a sign that read Private Family Cemetery, no trespassing. And she made it clear to every newspaper that published stories about the home. Jack Thornton's grave was not a tourist attraction. His redemption was not entertainment. His story was sacred, and she would protect it. You're fierce when you need to be, Josephine Hayes observed one afternoon, watching Eva chase off a group of tourists who'd climbed the fence for a photograph. Jack would have appreciated that. Jack made me promise to build something good from his death, Eva replied, breathing hard from the confrontation. I won't let people turn his grave into a carnival sideshow. His redemption was real, and it cost him everything. It deserves respect. In the spring of 1902, 19 years after Jack's death, Eva received a letter that made her hands tremble. It was from Catherine, Jack's former fiancée, the woman who'd left him when he'd refused to break his promise about the arranged marriage that had never happened. Dear Mrs. Morrison, I hope this letter finds you well, though I doubt you'll be pleased to receive it. My name is Catherine Sinclair, though I was Catherine Brennan when I knew Jack Thornton. I was engaged to him briefly, until I learned of his commitment to honor his father's wishes regarding a debt. I've followed the story of the Thornton Morrison home from afar, read the articles about what you've built with Jack's sacrifice. And I wanted you to know, I was wrong about him. I thought he was choosing duty over love, tradition over doing the right thing. But I see now that he was trying to honor multiple impossible commitments to his father, to his culture, to you. I heard he gave you everything in his final moments, not just the gold, but the truth about his daughter, about his love for you, about his hopes for what his death might create. That took more courage than I ever had. I left when things got complicated. He stayed and found a way to make meaning from impossibility. I'm writing because I'm dying of consumption, the doctors say, perhaps 6 months left. And I wanted to make my own small contribution to what Jack started. Enclosed is a bank draft for $500, everything I've saved. Use it however you see fit. Consider it an apology for not seeing the good in Jack when he was alive, and a thanks for showing the world what his love could accomplish. With respect and regret, Catherine Sinclair. Eva sat with the letter for a long time, feeling the weight of yet another life touched by Jack's death. Catherine had loved him once, and had walked away when his choices became too complicated. And now, facing her own death, she wanted to be part of the legacy he'd created. Eva used Catherine's money to plant a garden, not just any garden, but a memorial garden with a bench and flowering trees, a place where residents could sit and remember their own dead, their own losses. She put a small plaque on the bench, in memory of all who loved imperfectly but tried anyway. It seemed appropriate. None of them, not Jack, not Eva, not Catherine, not any of the broken people who'd found their way to the Thornton Morrison home had loved each other perfectly. They'd all made mistakes, walked away when they should have stayed when they should have walked away. But they'd tried. And in the trying, they'd created something that mattered. That summer, Eva turned 54. She'd been running the home for 19 years, and had poured her entire adult life into the work Jack's dying words had given her. She was bone-deep tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. But she was also content in a way she'd never been during her marriages, during her years as a ghost, during any moment before Jack had bled out in her arms and handed her a purpose. You should retire, Doc Patterson told her one afternoon, checking her heart rate and frowning at what he heard. You're wearing yourself out, Eva. Your heart isn't as strong as it used to be. None of our hearts are as strong as they used to be, Eva replied. But they are strong enough for what needs doing. Stubbornness isn't strength. In my experience, it's the only strength that matters. Eva stood, smoothed her skirts. I'll rest when I'm dead, document. Until then, there's work to be done. But privately, Eva knew he was right. She could feel her body failing in small ways, the breathlessness when she climbed stairs, the way her hands trembled after too much writing, the exhaustion that came earlier each evening. She was dying, slowly but surely, worn out by 19 years of relentless work and the accumulated grief of too many losses. She didn't mind. She'd lived a full life, maybe 2 full lives packed into her 54 years. And when her time came, she'd be buried beneath the cottonwood tree with Jack and Sarah and Elizabeth, finally together in death in a way they'd never managed in life. But before that happened, she had one more thing to do. One final act that would ensure Jack's legacy and her own would endure long after both of them were forgotten. She sat down at her desk that evening and began to write. Eva wrote for 3 months, working late into each night after the residents had gone to bed. She wrote about Jack, not the legend, but the man. She wrote about their young love, the engagement broken by fear, the 20 years of careful distance. She wrote about Dalton Reeves's challenge, about the duel in the dying light, about Jack's final words that had changed everything. But most importantly, she wrote about what came after. About the home that had risen from violence, about the lives saved by blood money transformed into mercy. About redemption being possible even for those who seemed beyond saving. She wrote it all in a letter, not a letter to be published, but a letter to be opened 20 years after her death, when everyone directly involved in the story would be gone and the truth could be told without hurting those who'd lived it. To whoever reads this in the year of our Lord 1922 or beyond. My name is Evangeline Morrison, though by the time you read this, I'll have been dead for 2 decades and my name will mean nothing. But the Thornton Morrison home, if it still stands, and I pray it does. That will mean something. And you deserve to know the full truth of how it came to be. This is not a story about heroes. Black Jack Thornton was a killer who found redemption too late to save himself, but just in time to save others. I was a coward who let fear dictate my choices until grief finally taught me courage. We were both broken people trying to make something whole from shattered pieces. But here's what I've learned in 19 years of running this home. Brokenness isn't disqualifying. In fact, it might be required. The people who do the most good in this world are often the ones who've experienced the most pain, who understand suffering not as an abstract concept but as a lived reality. Jack gave me 3 gifts in his dying breath. First, the truth about his daughter Sarah, my niece, my sister's child, a connection I'd been denied while she lived but could honor in death. Second, the gold that funded this home was $15,000 earned through violence but spent on peace. Third, and most precious, the permission to transform pain into purpose. That last gift is the one I want you to understand. When Jack died, I could have retreated into grief. Could have spent the rest of my life as a ghost, existing but not living. Instead, I chose to build. To take the worst thing that had happened to me and create something beautiful from it. That choice is available to everyone. You don't need blood money or dying declarations or tragic love stories. You just need to decide that your pain will serve a purpose, that your suffering won't be wasted, that the worst things that happen to you can become the foundation for the best things you do. If the Thornton Morrison home still exists when you read this, it's because enough people made that choice. Because residents who found refuge here went on to build refuges for others. Because widows who were saved learned to save others. Because children who grew up learned to protect those more vulnerable than themselves. That's Jack's real legacy, not the home itself, but the idea that redemption is always possible, that it's never too late to do one good thing, that love can survive and even thrive in the most impossible circumstances. Some debts can only be paid in blood, Jack told me. But some loves can only be proven in sacrifice. He was right about both. And I've spent 19 years proving that both his sacrifice and his love created ripples that will continue long after we're both dust beneath the cottonwood tree. Live accordingly. Evangeline Morrison, September 17, 1902. She sealed the letter, gave it to her lawyer with instructions that it not be opened until 1922, and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The story was told. The truth was preserved. Whatever happened now, Jack's redemption and her work would be remembered correctly, not as romance or adventure, but as the hard, painful, beautiful work of transforming death into life. The years that followed were Eva's gentlest. She'd hired a capable assistant superintendent, a widow named Grace Coleman who'd arrived at the home 5 years prior, fleeing a violent marriage, and had discovered a talent for administration. Grace took over more of the daily operations, allowing Eva to step back from the relentless pace that had defined her first 15 years. Eva spent her time with the children now, teaching them to read, telling them stories, helping them understand that their circumstances didn't define their futures. She spent hours in the memorial garden, tending the flowers, sitting on Catherine's bench and remembering all the people whose imperfect love had made this place possible. And every September 17th, she visited the 3 graves beneath the cottonwood tree. 20 years this year, she told Jack's headstone in 1903. 20 years since you died in my arms. 20 years since you gave me purpose. I'm tired, Jack. I'm so tired. But it's been a good 20 years. The best of my life, if I'm being honest. Because for once, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't playing it safe. I was living as big and loud and purposeful as I knew how. The wind rustled through the cottonwood leaves, and Eva smiled. I'll see you soon, old friend. Not today, probably not this year. But soon. And when I do, I hope you'll be proud of what I built with what you gave me. She lived 4 more years. 4 years of slowing down, of watching the home thrive under Grace's capable management, of writing letters to donors and politicians and anyone who might ensure the work continued after she was gone. 4 years of slowly letting go of the reins she'd held so tightly for 2 decades. On the morning of September 17, 1907, 24 years to the day after Jack's death, Eva woke feeling different. Lighter somehow, as if gravity had loosened its hold. She dressed carefully, ate a small breakfast, and walked out to the cottonwood tree alone. It was a beautiful morning, the kind of September day that made Arizona almost tolerable, with cool air and clear skies and the promise of autumn finally breaking summer's brutal grip. Eva sat on the bench near the graves, closed her eyes, and listened to the sounds of the home in the distance. Children playing, women laughing, the sounds of life continuing, thriving, echoing into a future she wouldn't see but had helped build. "I'm ready," she said quietly to the graves, to Jack, to whatever came next. "I've done what you asked. Built something beautiful from something terrible. Turn your violence into peace, your death into life. I'm ready to rest now." She felt pain then sharp and sudden in her chest, stealing her breath. Her heart, she realized distantly. The heart that Doc Patterson had warned her about for years, finally deciding it had worked long enough. Eva wasn't afraid. She'd faced death before Thomas's death, Jack's death, her own slow dying over the past 24 years of exhausting work. This was just the final step in a journey that had started on a dusty street with gunfire and blood and impossible love. As her vision dimmed, she thought she saw someone walking toward her through the cottonwood's dappled shade. A man in a black duster, moving with the confident stride of someone who'd finally laid down his burdens. He reached out a hand, and Eva took it, feeling strength and warmth and the recognition of a love that had survived 20 years of separation and could survive eternity beyond death. "Took you long enough," Jack said, smiling that rare smile she'd seen so seldom in life. "I've been waiting." "Had work to finish," Eva replied, and felt herself rising, leaving behind the body that had carried her through 59 years of joy and sorrow, love and loss, fear and courage. They found her that afternoon, Grace and several of the residents, worried when Eva hadn't returned for lunch. She was sitting peacefully on the bench, her eyes closed, a slight smile on her lined face. Gone, but not tragically. Just finished. They buried her beside Jack, under the cottonwood tree, exactly as she'd requested. 4 graves now, 4 people bound by blood and love and choices that had echoed across decades. The funeral was attended by over 200 people, residents past and present, donors from across the territory, officials and ordinary citizens who'd been touched by Eva's work. Reverend Walsh, now ancient and frail, spoke the eulogy. Evangeline Morrison was many things in her 59 years, he said, his voice wavering but strong. A daughter, a wife twice, a widow twice, a builder of sanctuaries. But more than any of those roles, she was a woman who understood that love is not about safety or certainty. It's about choosing to build something beautiful even when the foundation is terrible. She proved that redemption is possible, that it's never too late to do one good thing, and that sometimes our greatest purposes come from our deepest pain. May we all live as courageously, love as fiercely, and build as beautifully as she did. After the funeral, Grace Coleman stood before the assembled residents and staff and made an announcement. "The Thornton Morrison home will continue," she said firmly. "Eva spent 24 years building something that could outlive her, and it will. We'll honor her memory not with grief, but with the work she taught us to do, saving lives, offering sanctuary, proving that love is stronger than violence." And it did continue. Through wars and depressions, through changing times and social upheavals, the Thornton Morrison home endured. It evolved, adding modern facilities, professional social workers, therapeutic programs, but never lost sight of its founding purpose: to transform violence into peace, death into life, blood money into mercy. 20 years passed like a river flowing toward an inevitable ocean. The Thornton Morrison home that Eva and Jack had built with her hands, he with his death became more than just a refuge. It became a philosophy, a movement, a proof that the worst things humanity could do to itself didn't have to be the final word. By 1922, the original buildings had been expanded 5 times. The home now housed over 200 residents at any given time: orphans, widows, women fleeing violence, elderly people with nowhere else to go. It employed 40 staff members, operated a school that rivaled the best in the territory, ran vocational programs that placed its graduates in jobs across 3 states. It had spawned similar institutions in Phoenix, Tucson, and as far away as San Francisco, each one built on the same principle: that love, even love born from tragedy, could change the world. Grace Coleman, now 63 and gray but still sharp as winter ice, stood in the office that had once been Eva's and held the letter. The letter Eva had written 20 years ago, to be opened on this specific date, September 17, 1922. 39 years to the day since Black Jack Thornton had died in a dusty street and whispered 3 secrets that would echo across decades. "Should we read it privately first?" asked Grace's assistant, a young woman named Rose who'd been orphaned at 6 and raised entirely within these walls. Rose was 22 now, newly graduated from teaching college, returned to the home to give back what had been given to her. "No," Grace said firmly. "Eva meant this for everyone. For the people who live here now and the people who'll come after." We read it together. She called a meeting in the chapel, the beautiful stone structure that had been added in 1910, funded by a railroad magnate whose sister had found sanctuary at the home after her husband's suicide. Every resident who could walk attended. Staff members filled the back pews. And standing along the walls were others, former residents who'd traveled from across the country to be present for this moment. Donors who'd supported the work for decades, journalists who'd heard rumors of a sealed letter and smelled a story. Sheriff Thomas Hayes, son of the original Sheriff Hayes, now carrying his father's badge and his father's integrity, stood near the front with his own son, a boy of 8 who'd been born into a world where the Thornton Morrison home was simply part of the landscape, as permanent as the mountains. Grace opened the letter with trembling fingers and began to read. She read Eva's words about Jack being a killer who'd found redemption too late to save himself but just in time to save others. About Eva being a coward who'd let fear dictate her choices until grief taught her courage. About both of them being broken people trying to make something whole from shattered pieces. She read about the 3 gifts Jack had given Eva in his dying breath: the truth about Sarah, the gold that funded the home, and the permission to transform pain into purpose. And then she read Eva's central message, the truth she'd wanted preserved. Brokenness isn't disqualifying. In fact, it might be required. The people who do the most good in this world are often the ones who've experienced the most pain, who understand suffering not as an abstract concept but as a lived reality. The chapel was utterly silent. Some people were crying openly. Others sat with expressions of profound recognition, seeing their own stories reflected in Eva's words. Grace continued reading, her voice gaining strength. That choice is available to everyone. You don't need blood money or dying declarations or tragic love stories. You just need to decide that your pain will serve a purpose, that your suffering won't be wasted, that the worst things that happen to you can become the foundation for the best things you do. When she finished, when Eva's final words had been spoken to an audience Eva herself would never meet, Grace carefully refolded the letter. But before she could speak, Rose stood. "I have something to add," Rose said, her young voice carrying across the chapel. "Something Mrs. Coleman doesn't know, because I've kept it secret until today." Grace looked surprised but nodded for Rose to continue. "When I was 9 years old," Rose began, "Mrs. Morrison took me aside one day. I'd been having nightmares about the fire that killed my parents, about being alone, about all the terrible things that had happened before I came here. And Mrs. Morrison sat me down and told me something I've never forgotten." Rose pulled a worn piece of paper from her pocket. "She made me write it down, said I should keep it and read it whenever I felt lost. I've carried it with me for 13 years. I'd like to read it now, because I think it's what she'd want us to hear today." Grace gestured for her to proceed, and Rose unfolded the paper, her hands steady despite her emotion. She said, "Rose, listen carefully because this is the most important thing I'll ever teach you. The worst day of your life, the day you lost your parents, the day you thought the world had ended, that day doesn't get to be the end of your story. It's just the middle. The hard middle where the hero has to decide if she'll let the darkness win or if she'll find a way to make light from it." Rose's voice cracked, but she continued. "You get to choose what your story becomes. You can let that fire define you as a victim, or you can let it refine you into someone who understands loss and uses that understanding to help others. The pain you've experienced isn't wasted. For what? You won't know until later. But trust me, Rose. Every terrible thing you survive makes you stronger for helping someone else survive their terrible thing." She looked up from the paper, tears streaming down her face. "That's what this place taught me. That's what Mrs. Morrison's life proved. And that's what Mr. Thornton's death brought for all of us, the chance to transform our worst days into our greatest purposes." An elderly woman in the 4th row stood slowly. She was perhaps 80, her face a roadmap of hard years, but her eyes were clear and fierce. "My name is Margaret Reeves," she said, and a ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Some of the older residents knew that name, the mother of the gunslinger Jack had killed, the woman who donated $200 30 years ago. "I came today because I wanted to see what came of my son's death," Margaret continued, her voice surprisingly strong. "Wanted to know if his wasted life could have any meaning beyond being a cautionary tale. And I've learned something in the past 30 years of watching this place from a distance. Even the worst of us can contribute to something good if we choose to. My son was a rabid dog who deserved the death he got. But his dying here, in this place, at this time made it possible for Mrs. Morrison to build all this. So even Dalton, in his way, served a purpose." She sat down heavily, and another person stood, a man in his 40s, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone who'd succeeded in life. "My name is James," he said. Some of you older residents might remember me. I lived here from ages 7 to 16, after my parents died of cholera in 1891. Mrs. Morrison taught me to read, taught me carpentry, gave me the skills and confidence I needed to build a life. I'm a contractor now in Phoenix. Built 3 schools and a hospital. And every building I construct, I think about this place. About how Mrs. Morrison built a sanctuary out of tragedy. About how Mr. Thornton's blood money became my chance at a future. Another person stood. Then another. And another. A woman who'd fled a violent husband in 1895 and now ran a shelter for abused women in Tucson. A man who'd been orphaned at 12 and now worked as a judge, dedicating his career to protecting children in the legal system. A widow who'd arrived broken in 1903 and left healed in 1906, going on to become a nurse who'd served in the Great War, saving lives that might have been lost. One by one, they stood and testified. Not in the religious sense, but in the practical sense, bearing witness to how the Thornton Morrison home had transformed their lives, and how they'd taken that transformation and spread it like ripples from a stone thrown in still water. Grace listened to all of them, her heart swelling with something that felt like vindication and grief and hope all mixed together. Eva had never known most of these people, and would never know the full extent of what her work had accomplished. But she'd trusted that it would echo forward, that the purpose Jack's death had given her would ripple out across decades and generations. And it had. When the testimonies finally ended, when the last person had sat down and the chapel had fallen back into contemplative silence, Grace stood again. Eva Morrison left us one final instruction, she said, pulling a second document from the envelope. A codicil to her will that was to be revealed at the same time as the letter. She established a permanent endowment for the Thornton Morrison home, funded by the last of Jack Thornton's gold and every penny she'd saved over 24 years of work. That endowment, managed carefully and grown through wise investment, now totals over $200,000. Gasps echoed through the chapel. It was a staggering sum, enough to fund the home's operations for decades. But there's a condition, Grace continued. The money can only be used if we maintain Eva's founding principles. We must always welcome those others have given up on. We must always believe redemption is possible. We must always transform pain into purpose. And every resident who leaves here must be challenged to take what they've received and give it to someone else who needs it. She held up the document so everyone could see. This isn't just about money. It's about a covenant, a promise we make to Eva, to Jack, to Sarah and Elizabeth and everyone else whose stories are woven into this place. We promise to continue the work. To prove, every single day, that love is stronger than violence, that hope is more powerful than despair, that the worst things that happen to us don't have to define what we become. Grace's voice rose, filling the chapel with a passion that Eva herself would have recognized. Some of you came here broken. Some of you came here with nothing. Some of you came here believing you were worthless, that the world had no place for you, that your pain was meaningless. But you're leaving here, or you've already left here, with purpose, with skills, with the knowledge that you matter, that your suffering wasn't wasted, that you can take the worst thing that ever happened to you and make it the foundation for the best thing you ever do. She paused, letting the words settle. That's Black Jack Thornton's real legacy. Not the home itself, not the buildings or the programs or the money. But the idea is the revolutionary, world-changing idea that it's never too late to do one good thing. That love can survive and even thrive in the most impossible circumstances. That broken people can build whole things. That your worst day doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the middle, the hard middle where you decide who you will become. The congregation stood as one, not because anyone asked them to, but because the moment demanded it. They stood in honor of Eva Morrison, who'd transformed her grief into a movement. They stood in honor of Black Jack Thornton, who'd proven redemption was possible even for killers. They stood in honor of Sarah and Elizabeth, whose deaths had meaning because Eva had refused to let them be meaningless. And they stood in honor of themselves, the broken, the lost, the forgotten, the ones society had written off but who'd found, in this place built on blood money and impossible love, the chance to become something more than their circumstances had intended. After the meeting, Grace walked alone to the cottonwood tree where 4 graves rested in the shade. The tree was massive now, its branches spreading so wide that they seemed to embrace the entire property. Someone had planted flowers around the graves' bright blooms that defied Arizona's harsh climate, thriving through careful tending and stubborn determination. Much like the home itself, Grace thought. She sat on the bench the one Eva had died on 20 years ago and looked at the 4 headstones. They'd been cleaned recently, the carved letters still sharp and clear. Sarah Catherine Thornton 1875 to 1883 beloved daughter. Catherine Thornton 1857 to 1875 rest in peace. Jonathan Black Jack Thornton 1841 to 1883 some debts can only be paid in blood. Evangeline Morrison 1848 to 1907 some loves can only be proven in sacrifice. We did it, Grace said softly to the graves. Everything you asked, everything you hoped for. The home is thriving. The work continues. Your story is told. And the people you saved have gone on to save others, just like you knew they would. She pulled out the letter, Eva's letter, and read it one more time in the fading afternoon light. When she reached the end, she noticed something she'd missed during the public reading: a postscript, written in different ink, as if Eva had added it later. P.S. If you're reading this, you're probably wondering if it was worth it. 24 years of exhausting work, of sacrificing my own comfort and happiness, of choosing purpose over peace, if all of that was worth the cost. Here's my answer: yes. 1,000 times yes. Not because I built something that bears my name or because people will remember me, but because I got to live a life that mattered. I got to take the worst thing that ever happened to me, losing Jack, and transform it into the best thing I ever did. I got to prove that love doesn't end with death, that it actually gets stronger when it has a purpose beyond itself. Jack died to protect me. I lived to protect everyone else. And in doing so, we both found the redemption we'd been seeking since we were 19 and foolish and convinced love alone would be enough. Love alone isn't enough. But love with purpose. Love with sacrifice. Love that transforms pain into sanctuary and death into life. That changes everything. Live accordingly. Grace folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. She'd have it framed, hung in the entrance hall alongside the donor board and the photographs of the home's history. Future generations would read it and understand that the Thornton Morrison home wasn't built on money or charity or even good intentions. It was built on love. Impossible, tragic, redemptive love that had refused to die even when the lovers did. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in those familiar shades of amber and crimson, Grace heard children laughing in the distance. Dinner would be starting soon. 200 people gathering around tables in the dining hall Jack's gold had built, eating food Eva's determination had provided, living lives that never would have existed without a gunslinger's final shot and a widow's stubborn choice to transform death into life. Some debts could only be paid in blood, Jack had said. Some loves could only be proven in sacrifice, Eva had answered. But what neither of them had fully understood until the very end was this: some stories are too powerful to end with death. They just change form, rippling forward through decades and generations, touching lives that will never know the names of the people who started it all but will forever carry the echo of their choices. Black Jack Thornton had been a killer who'd found redemption in his last moment. Evangeline Morrison had been a coward who'd found courage in her worst moment. Together, they'd proven something the world desperately needed to believe: that it's never too late to do one good thing. That your past doesn't have to determine your future. That love, even love that seems impossible, even love that costs everything, can change the world if you're brave enough to build something with it. The Thornton Morrison home still stands today. It's been renovated countless times, expanded and modernized and adapted to serve each new generation's needs. But in the entrance hall, you'll find a bronze plaque that tells the founding story honestly, without romance or sentimentality. It talks about a gunslinger who saved his money for 8 years, waiting for a purpose to give it meaning. About a widow who took blood money and transformed it into mercy. About a duel in a dusty street that ended with words instead of victory. About love that couldn't survive life but thrived beyond death. And it ends with Eva's challenge, the same challenge she'd given to Rose when she was 9 years old. The challenge that every resident of the home receives when they arrive and again when they leave. The worst day of your life doesn't get to be the end of your story. It's just the middle. The hard middle where you decide if you'll let the darkness win or if you'll find a way to make light from it. You get to choose what your story becomes. Choose well. Thousands of people have read those words over the past 100 years. Thousands have taken them to heart, have chosen to transform their pain into purpose, have proven that Eva Morrison and Black Jack Thornton's legacy isn't measured in buildings or money or even the lives directly saved. It's measured in the ripples. In every person who leaves the Thornton Morrison home and goes on to help someone else. In every act of kindness done by someone who learned kindness there. In every life touched by people who were themselves touched by the impossible love story of a gunslinger and a widow who proved that redemption was possible, that love was stronger than death, that the worst things humanity does to itself don't have to be the final word. 3 graves rest under a cottonwood tree in what's now called Morrison Park, next to the still thriving Thornton Morrison home. 4 graves. Actually, they added a 4th in 1945, when Grace Coleman finally joined the people she'd served so faithfully. Visitors come sometimes, people researching history or genealogy or just curious about the legend. They read the headstones, take pictures, and wonder about the people buried there. Some see a gunslinger who got what he deserved. Some see a widow who wasted her life on charity work. Some see old graves, old stories, old history that has nothing to do with the modern world. But some, the ones who take the time to read Eva's letter in the entrance hall, the ones who learn the full story, see something else entirely. They see proof that you're never too broken to build something beautiful. That love doesn't end with death, it just changes form. That the worst things that happen to us can become the foundation for the best things we do. That redemption is always possible, for anyone, no matter what they've done or how far they've fallen. And that sometimes, the most powerful act of love isn't staying together or grand gestures or happy endings. Sometimes it's dying to protect someone, and having them honor that death by living so fully, so purposefully, so courageously that your sacrifice echoes across generations. Black Jack Thornton whispered 3 secrets to Evangeline Morrison in his dying breath. She spent 24 years proving that those secrets could change the world. And now, over a century later, the ripples are still spreading, still changing lives, still proving that love, impossible, tragic, redemptive love is the most powerful force in the universe. Some debts can only be paid in blood. Some loves can only be proven in sacrifice. But some stories are too powerful to ever really end. They just keep echoing forward, forever and always, transforming pain into purpose, death into life, violence into peace. One whispered word at a time. One saved life at a time. One choice at a time to believe that redemption is possible, that love matters, that the worst day of your life doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be in the middle, the hard, beautiful, transformative middle where you decide who you'll become. Choose well, live accordingly, and remember, it's never too late to do one good thing. Never. The end. Black Jack Thornton died in a dusty street in 1883. Evangeline Morrison died under a cottonwood tree in 1907. But their love, their purpose, their proof that redemption is possible and that broken people can build whole things, that never died. It's alive in every person who reads their story and decides to transform their own pain into purpose. Alive in every act of kindness done by someone who learned that love is stronger than violence. Alive in you, right now, as you finish this story and decide what you'll do with your own worst days. Will you let them define you? Or will you use them as a foundation to build something beautiful? The choice, as it always has been, is yours. What's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? And more importantly, what are you building with it? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be the ripple someone else needs to start their own transformation.